the wellspring of shadows. The offer had seemed too good to be true, and in Jessica's experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. A sprawling farmhouse over 100 years old, nestled deep in the vast, untamed wilderness of northern Arizona. Buster and Daisy, usually quick to bark at any unfamiliar noise, would be strangely silent, curled tightly together, whimpering softly, their ears flattened against their heads. Their fear was palpable, a chilling contrast to their usual protective instincts. Jessica told herself it was just a strange animal, perhaps something she hadn't encountered yet. The wilderness was vast, full of unknowns. But the dog's reaction unnerved her. Then came the footprints. One morning, after a light rain, she noticed a set of tracks near the edge of her property, leading towards the dense forest. They were large, wider than a coyote's, and with too many toes, but as she knelt closer, squinting, they seemed to elongate. The shape seemed to warp subtly, almost imperceptibly before her eyes, becoming more human-like, then stretching back into something monstrously canine. She blinked, rubbed her eyes. It must be the rain, she thought, distorting the mud. A trick of the light. She took a photo with her phone, but in the flat, two-dimensional image, they just looked like blurry animal prints, nothing conclusive. The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't the fleeting unease of being alone in a remote place. It was a persistent, tangible presence. She felt eyes on her as she gardened, as she walked the dogs, even as she sat reading on her porch. It was a cold, predatory gaze that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She'd scan the tree line, the vast, empty expanse of land, but see nothing. Just the endless pines, their shadows long and still. One evening, Daisy, her more timid dog, began to whimper at the back door, scratching frantically. Jessica opened it, expecting her to need to go outside, but Daisy just stared out into the deepening twilight, her body rigid, a low, terrified growl rumbling in her chest. Buster, usually fearless, stood behind her, his tail tucked between his legs, a soft, guttural whine escaping him. Jessica followed their gaze. A few yards from the tree line, shrouded in the deepening shadows, she saw a pair of eyes. Two distinct, unblinking points of light, reflecting the last sliver of twilight. Too high for a deer, too steady for an owl. And then, as she stared, mesmerized by a growing dread, they seemed to blink vertically. Just once. A slow, deliberate vertical blink. The eyes vanished as quickly as they appeared. Jessica slammed the door shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. Remote, yes, but with enough land for her two dogs, Buster and Daisy, to roam free, and a stillness that promised respite from the suffocating hum of city life. After a particularly brutal year in marketing, marked by relentless deadlines and a soul-crushing divorce, Jessica craved isolation. She didn't sleep that night, huddled with her trembling dogs, a hunting rifle, unloaded, unfamiliar, clutched tightly in her hands. The next morning, Buster was gone. Jessica searched frantically, calling his name until her throat was raw. She walked the perimeter of her property, then extended her search into the woods, Daisy trotting anxiously at her heels, sniffing the ground, whimpering. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, nothing. Just Buster, vanished without a trace. It was as if he had simply melted into the earth. She drove into Juniper Gulch, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, to report him missing. Sheriff Brody, a burly man with a kind but weary face, listened patiently. "Happens out here, ma'am," he said, adjusting his Stetson. "Coyotes, mountain lions. The wilderness takes its toll." But there were no tracks, no fur. "And my other dog, Daisy, she's terrified," Jessica insisted, her voice tight with unshed tears. "And last night I saw eyes in the dark. Strange eyes." Sheriff Brody nodded slowly, his gaze drifting towards the window, out towards the distant mountains. "Folks out here, they see things. Woods play tricks on you, especially when you're alone." His tone was dismissive, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief moment of knowing before he schooled his features back to polite indifference. He promised to keep an eye out, but Jessica knew it was a formality. He didn't believe her. Days turned into weeks. Buster remained gone. Daisy grew increasingly withdrawn, rarely leaving Jessica's side, her ears twitching constantly, listening to something Jessica couldn't hear. The strange sounds at night intensified. Now, they weren't just growls and whimpers, they were voices. At first, faint, distorted, echoing through the pines, but then clearer, whispers of her name. A child's laugh, light and eerie, followed by a low, guttural chuckle. Sometimes it sounded like a woman crying, a mournful, heart-wrenching sob that Jessica found herself almost drawn to before a wave of pure revulsion would wash over her. One afternoon, she was chopping firewood on the porch. The rhythmic thud of the axe against the wood was suddenly broken by a sound that made her freeze. "Jessica!" It was Daniel's voice. Her brother, Daniel. He lived over 1,000 miles away in Boston. He hadn't told her he was coming. Her axe dropped to the ground with a clang. "Daniel?" She called out, a mixture of confusion and relief washing over her. "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," the voice called back, seemingly from the edge of the woods, just beyond the thickest part of the tree line. "Just came to surprise you." A slow, unsettling dread began to creep in. She craved quiet. She craved a place where the only sounds were the wind through the pines and the distant cry of a hawk. The nearest town, Juniper Gulch, was a dusty collection of a general store, a gas station, and a post office, about an hour's drive down a winding, unpaved road. Daniel never surprised her. He always texted, always called, and his voice, it sounded like him, but there was a slight hollow quality to it, like an echo in a cave, and a faint, almost imperceptible hiss after the S sound. She gripped the axe handle, her knuckles white. Daisy, who had been sleeping by her feet, suddenly sprang up, hackles raised, a low, terrifying snarl tearing from her throat. Her eyes were fixed on the tree line, wide with fear and primal rage. "Daniel, come out here!" Jessica yelled, trying to keep her voice steady. "Almost there!" "Just tangled in some bushes," the voice replied, that subtle hiss still present, like air escaping a punctured tire. And then a series of rustling sounds, too loud, too deliberate for someone merely walking through undergrowth. It sounded like something large was forcing its way through the dense vegetation, breaking branches. Jessica's mind raced. It wasn't Daniel. It couldn't be. Daniel hated the wilderness. And that sound, she remembered the vertical blink, the impossibly changing footprints. "Daniel, if that's you, walk towards the sunlight," she commanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. The rustling stopped. A profound silence descended. Then, slowly, a figure began to emerge from the shadows of the tree line. It was tall, lean, dressed in a familiar flannel shirt and jeans, Daniel's clothes. But as it stepped into a sliver of sunlight, Jessica saw it. The face was Daniel's, distorted. The eyes were too wide, too dark, almost black, and they held an unblinking, predatory stare. The skin seemed stretched, taut over the bones, and the jaw looked unnaturally broad. And the smile, oh God, the smile. It stretched too far, revealing teeth that were too many, too sharp like a wolf's. It was a grotesque parody of her brother, a macabre costume. It took a single step forward, and the faint hiss became clearer, almost a whisper, as if it was fighting to hold the human form. "Jessica, why aren't you coming closer?" the voice rasped, the words sounding wet, unnatural. Daisy unleashed a furious bark, a desperate primal warning. Jessica didn't hesitate. She scrambled back, axe still in hand, rushing into the cabin and slamming the heavy wooden door shut, fumbling with the deadbolt and then adding the rusty slide bolt. She jammed a heavy chair under the handle for good measure. She heard a low, guttural growl from outside, followed by a heavy thud against the door that rattled the entire cabin. Then silence. A chilling, expectant silence. She pressed her ear against the door, holding her breath, Daisy whimpering softly beside her. She heard nothing. Its population sign boasted Est, 1888, Pop 147. Jessica had dismissed the locals' wary glances and the hushed tones about the old ways and things that walk in the woods. She was a pragmatist, a city girl with a healthy skepticism for folklore. No footsteps, no rustling, no further calls. It was gone. Or was it? She peered through a crack in the curtains, her heart hammering. The clearing was empty. The shadows of the pines were long and still. But the air felt heavy, charged with an invisible presence, a pervasive coldness that seeped into her bones. Jessica didn't sleep for days. She barricaded herself inside the cabin, leaving only for quick, desperate trips to the outhouse, always with the rifle, always scanning the tree line. She rationed her food, growing thinner, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. The line between waking and dreaming blurred. The image of Daniel's distorted face, that monstrous smile, burned into her mind. She called Daniel hysterically, telling him what she'd seen. He was confused, then worried. "Jessica, are you okay? I'm still in Boston. I haven't left. You need to come home, or let me come get you." He sounded genuinely concerned, but his words only added to her terror. It hadn't been him. So what had it been? She tried to explain about the skinwalker, the legends she'd vaguely heard online, the feeling of being hunted. He listened patiently, then gently suggested she might be experiencing a breakdown, that the isolation was getting to her. "You're stressed, Jess. You've been through a lot. Your mind is playing tricks." His dismissive tone, though kind, isolated her further. She couldn't tell him. No one would believe her. She was alone. Truly, terribly alone. The entity didn't try to mimic anyone else for a while. Instead, it played with her. At night, she'd hear it. A series of taps on the windows, moving from one side of the cabin to the other. Sometimes, a scratching on the roof, like long claws dragging across the shingles. And the sounds, oh God, the sounds. Not voices anymore, but a disturbing mix of animal noises, perfectly replicated, but often blending and twisting into grotesque symphony. The howl of a wolf morphing into the caw of a raven, then into the guttural snort of a bear, all within a single breath. It was a perverse display of its capabilities, a cruel reminder that it was out there, capable of anything. She'd stand by the darkened windows, the rifle trembling in her hands, trying to discern a shape, a shadow, anything. But there was never anything. Just the sounds echoing in the vast silence of the wilderness, slowly, inexorably driving her mad. One night, the tapping on the window started again right outside her bedroom. Jessica crept silently, heart pounding, and peered through a tiny gap in the curtains. The farmhouse itself was charming, a sturdy log structure with a wide porch and a stone fireplace, surrounded by ancient ponderosa pines and a rugged, seemingly endless expanse of scrubland and red rock. It felt like a fresh start, a clean slate. The first few weeks were idyllic. The night was moonless, pitch black. She saw nothing, but the tapping continued, persistent, rhythmic. Then it changed. It became a scratching, insistent rhythmic like fingernails dragging across glass. And then a low, wet whisper seemed to glide along the pane right where she was looking. "Let me in." It was a voice she didn't recognize, deep and gravelly, yet with an unnerving, childlike lilt. It sent shivers down her spine. Her logical mind screamed at her to turn on the lights, to confront it, to prove it was just a trick of her mind. But a deeper, primal fear rooted her to the spot. Daisy, who had been sleeping in her bed, suddenly began to growl, a low, continuous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. She stared at the window, her body tense, every muscle taut. Jessica backed away slowly, clutching the rifle, her eyes fixed on the blackness beyond the glass. She started seeing it in her peripheral vision during the day, a fleeting shadow darting behind a tree, a glimpse of something impossibly fast moving between the dense bushes. She'd spin around, but it would always be gone, leaving only the oppressive silence and the feeling of eyes on her. Her paranoia consumed her. Every creak of the old cabin became a footstep, every rustle of leaves a lurking presence. She began to suspect everyone in Juniper Gulch. Sheriff Brody's knowing glance, Old Man Silas, who ran the general store, with his perpetually squinted eyes and his hushed warnings about things that don't belong. Were they involved? Were they protecting it? Or were they just as much its victims, conditioned to ignore the terror that walked among them? She tried to leave, packed her old pickup truck, Daisy whimpering anxiously beside her. But as she drove down the long, winding dirt road, the truck's engine sputtered, coughed, and died. No amount of coaxing would restart it. She tried her phone, no signal, stranded, alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, casting long, menacing shadows from the pines. She walked back to the cabin defeated, her heart a lead weight in her chest. It wasn't letting her go, it was playing with her, deliberately trapping her. As she approached the cabin, she saw something chilling. Buster, her beloved golden retriever. He was sitting on the porch, perfectly still, staring at the front door. "Buster!" she cried, a sob of relief catching in her throat. She ran towards him, Daisy barking excitedly beside her. But as she got closer, Daisy stopped, her excited barks turning into a low, terrifying growl. Buster didn't move. He didn't wag his tail. Jessica woke with the sun, the air crisp and clean, tasting of pine and damp earth. She spent her days exploring the trails with Buster, a boisterous golden retriever, and Daisy, a more cautious border collie mix. He just sat there, his head cocked slightly to the side, his eyes fixed on Jessica. They were Buster's eyes, brown and intelligent, but they held an unnerving stillness, a vacant quality she hadn't seen since that little girl by the chapel in Mark's story. And the smile, the dog's muzzle seemed to stretch, subtly, impossibly, revealing a flash of teeth that were too large, too sharp for a golden retriever. And she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible hiss accompanying his silent, unnatural smile. "Buster?" Jessica whispered, backing away slowly, Daisy pressing herself against her leg, whimpering frantically. The thing on the porch slowly stood up. It moved like Buster, trotting a few steps towards her, then pausing. Its head tilted further, an unnatural angle that no dog's neck should manage. And then a sound, a perfect, exact replica of Buster's happy bark, full of joy and playful energy. But it was too loud, too sudden, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a sound designed to lure, to deceive. Jessica's blood ran cold. This wasn't Buster. This was the thing. And it was wearing her dog. She turned and ran. Not back to the truck, not to the main road, but deeper into the woods, a desperate, illogical sprint fueled by pure terror. Daisy, terrified, followed at her heels, yelping. She heard the buster bark behind her, getting closer, followed by a heavy thudding sound, like something large and bipedal was running on all fours, mimicking the dog, but failing. The sounds of breaking branches, unnaturally loud. She didn't know where she was going. She just ran, the ancient trees blurring past, her lungs burning, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The air grew colder, and that cloying sweet decay, the scent of lilies and something else, something metallic, filled her nostrils. She stumbled, fell, scraped her hands and knees on the rocky ground, but scrambled back up, pushing herself onward. She heard it behind her, closer now. A wet, guttural panting punctuated by the forced, eerie sound of Buster's bark, sometimes blending into a low, human-like chuckle. It was mocking her, enjoying the chase. Suddenly, she burst into a small clearing surrounded by a ring of ancient, gnarled trees. In the center, almost hidden by overgrown brush, was a small circular depression in the earth, an old, disused well. She recoiled, the dread in her stomach growing. It was like the one Mark had described in Oakhaven, a dark, silent maw filled with unseen horrors. As she hesitated, the sounds behind her stopped. An absolute, oppressive silence descended. Jessica spun around, her eyes wide with terror. The clearing was empty. The tree line was still. She learned to identify the calls of various birds, the rustle of deer in the undergrowth. The nights were a blanket of stars, so bright they seemed close enough to touch, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets or the distant hoot of an owl. But she felt it. The weight of its presence, the cold, predatory gaze encompassing the entire clearing. Then, from the densest part of the tree line, a sound emerged. Not a mimicry, not a lure. It was a series of low, rhythmic clicks and pops, like bones rubbing together, rapidly escalating in speed. And then a gurgling wetness, as if something was struggling to form words, or perhaps to suppress an unspeakable hunger. A faint, shimmering distortion appeared in the air just at the edge of the tree line, like heat haze, but darker, more opaque, and through it she saw it for a split second before it snapped back. Not a shape, but a lack of shape. A twisting, amorphous void, too dark for the shadows, too deep for the night, with a single, massive, vertically blinking eye that seemed to absorb all light. A primal scream tore from Jessica's throat. This was it. This was the end. She squeezed her eyes shut, stumbled backward, and tripped, falling hard into the hollow of the old well. She hit the bottom with a sickening thud, pain lancing through her. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. She lay there, stunned, gasping for breath, expecting the shapeless horror to descend, to consume her. But nothing happened. She slowly opened her eyes. Above her, the opening of the well was a perfect circle of starlit sky, framed by the dark silhouette of the trees. The air around her was cold, damp, but the oppressive presence, the cloying scent, the terrifying sounds, they were gone. The silence was absolute. She lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the frantic beating of her own heart. Eventually, with trembling limbs, she pushed herself up. Huh? The well wasn't deep, maybe 10 feet. Its sides were crumbling, covered in moss and roots. She looked up, and above her, silhouetted against the starlit sky, was Daisy, whimpering softly, peering down at her, her tail drooping. She had followed her. She was safe. With newfound resolve, Jessica began to climb, digging her fingers into the loose stones and grasping at roots. It was slow, painful work, but she pulled herself up, inch by agonizing inch, until she finally dragged herself over the lip of the well. Daisy licked her face frantically, nudging her, whimpering. Jessica hugged her tight, burying her face in the dog's fur, sobbing with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. They walked back to the cabin. The truck was still dead. Then the silence began to shift. It started subtly, so subtly that Jessica almost dismissed it as her imagination, a peculiar sound at night unlike anything she'd heard before. It wasn't the familiar howl of a coyote, nor the shriek of a bobcat. It was a sound that seemed to change. She used the last of her phone battery to send a garbled text message to Daniel, a desperate plea for help, before the phone died completely. She huddled with Daisy through the rest of the night, the rifle still clutched in her hand, staring out at the menacing darkness, listening. But the sounds never came back. The presence never returned. Daniel arrived 2 days later, frantic with worry. He found Jessica huddled in the darkened cabin, thin, disheveled, her eyes wide and haunted. He saw the barricaded door, the rifle, the wildness in her gaze. He didn't question her story, not directly. He just gently helped her pack a few essentials, ignoring the abandoned house, the dead truck. He drove her back to the city, to his apartment, where he tried to care for her, to bring her back to some semblance of normalcy. But normalcy was a concept that no longer applied to Jessica. She never returned to the cabin. She sold the property site unseen, taking a significant loss, not caring about the money. The thought of that place, of the vast wilderness and what lurked within it, was enough to make her stomach churn. She lives in a small apartment now, on the top floor of a busy building, high above the street, surrounded by the comforting, if sometimes annoying, sounds of city life. The silence, the absolute silence, now terrifies her. She adopted another dog, a large German shepherd named Bear, who never leaves her side. She still dreams of it, of Daniel's stretched face, of Buster's smiling muzzle, of the vertical blink, and of that formless void by the well. She hears the clicks and pops in the quiet moments, the gurgling wetness just beneath the surface of silence. She checks her reflection endlessly, scrutinizing her own features, half expecting them to twist, to stretch, to betray her. She sees people now, in crowds, on the subway, in coffee shops, and she finds herself studying them, their movements, their voices, the subtle quirks of their expressions. She wonders how much of them is truly them. She wonders if there are other such entities, walking among us, wearing familiar faces, whispering forgotten names, waiting for their moment. She wonders if Old Man Silas in Juniper Gulch truly knew, if Sheriff Brody was truly oblivious, or if he too had simply learned to live with the terrifying, unspeakable truth. From that day, she still remains thinking about it. One moment, it was a low, guttural growl, too deep for any local animal she knew. The next, it morphed into a high-pitched whine, like a dog in distress, but with an underlying quality that felt wrong, somehow unnatural. She'd sit up in bed, heart thumping, listening intently, about the creature that wore the skin of her loved ones, the insidious horror that haunted her mind, and the chilling realization that some things defy logic, defy explanation, and leave behind a scar that can never truly heal, forcing you to forever question the very fabric of reality and the faces you trust. She knows deep down that it's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next game, its next victim. And sometimes, late at night when the city sounds fade, she can almost hear its faint, hungry breath, just beyond the edge of hearing, a terrifying echo of the wilderness that almost consumed her. Thanks for watching. The veil between our world and theirs is thinner than you think. Each like, each share, each subscription strengthens the connection. Feed the channel before it feeds on you.